Thank you. So again, we'll be recording and we'll be posting this recording of today's webinar at the project webpage. And we have links to that we'll provide later on in the presentation today. So we have set it up so that all participants, you will be muted and not have video for today's meeting. But when you have the opportunity at the end, we will have opportunity for discussion and questions. And so at the end, you're welcome to use your mute button and unmute button when it's your turn. We'll give you that ability. And if anyone happens to be joining by phone, that function is *6 to mute and unmute. Please feel free throughout the presentation, if you have questions that arise, please feel free to type those questions and comments in the Q&A, utilizing that Q&A button at any time. We will actually try to respond to questions as we go if we're able. And then when we get at the end of the presentation, when we open it up for questions and answers and input, we'll make sure we review all of those questions, and then also you all will have an opportunity to raise your hand, and then we can enable you to discuss, to provide input and feedback at that time. So I'd like to hand the meeting over now to my colleague, Erin, and she's going to really give you the background and the overview of what is this Fort Ord Habitat Resource Management Plan that we are developing, why do we need to develop it, and where we're at in that process. So Erin?
Great, thanks, Melanie. And I just want to extend Melanie's welcome. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list, and thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us this evening on this important kickoff, pretty much with the public on this project. For today's agenda, I'm going to provide a presentation that gives an overview of the resource management plan and an overview of the draft baseline inventory data that we've collected as part of our initial task for this project. And then we'll discuss the timeline and next steps, and we'll open up to community questions and input. And as Melanie said, please feel free to drop things in the Q&A as we move along, and we'll try to get to them as we move along. All right, next slide, please. As many of you are well aware, the former Fort Ord is a very environmentally and regulatory complex area. When the base closed early in the 90s, it triggered some disposal and reuse analysis that was subject to the National Environmental Policy Act, and also triggered consultation under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. That consultation resulted in the issuance of a biological opinion in 1993, the first one of the consultation series, and it required the preparation and implementation of a habitat management plan for the base-wide, installation-wide. As you can see here, this is the old photocopy of the cover back in April '97, and it required the local land use jurisdictions and those receiving land to comply with the requirements of the habitat management plan. It is an approved agreement. This consultation occurred between the U.S. Army and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And what it did is it established a habitat reserve system on the former Fort Ord. You can see a little bit here in this dark color, but we'll get to a better map in a moment. It also required all the signatories of this agreement, which included the county, to agree to fulfill the habitat management and borderland requirements outlined in this HMP. And I will have a number of acronyms, but again, if you have any questions about what language I'm speaking, please throw those in the Q&A and I will decipher those acronyms. Next slide, please. So here's what those conservation areas in the HMP look like. This is a really broad overview. The HMP is a lot more detailed than a green and clear map or white map that you see here. Generally speaking, the areas without color are designated as development parcels without any habitat management requirements. And then the green parcels have various levels and designations, various designations, category designations that require various levels of habitat management from reserve system, reserve level to basically some allowable development may occur in those areas, or some restrictions may occur. And Melanie, maybe you can be my cursor a little bit just to give context to these maps, since they're kind of put into space. You want to outline the Highway 1 area and the loop where the main entrance of former Fort Ord is. I don't know if you can do that with your cursor. Maybe.
Can you see my cursor on it?
No.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, good. It was just
Go
delayed.
left, go left.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a little difficult. I'll kind of
This is Highway
Yeah,
1
perfect.
going down here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. So Fort Ord Dune State Park, for example, is west of that Highway 1 area, and that's obviously a habitat area and shown in green. Heading east, Marina has a number of areas in the north. The county's areas are over in the kind of center middle of the former Fort Ord, and the Bureau of Land Management has a number of acres, about 7,000, that are available to the public now as part of the Fort Ord National Monument. And to the west, they call it the Army Impact Area, is a large area that's not quite ready for transfer to BLM at this time. The Army has retained that area for some additional cleanup. So generally that gives you some perspective of what we're talking about. In terms of acreage, the green areas total, well, the former Fort Ord is about 28,000 some odd acres, and about 18,650 acres comprise the green area, with about 10,000 acres comprising the designated development parcels shown without color here. All right, thanks, Melanie. So why are we here? Many of you I saw on the attendee list remember that the Fort Ord Reuse Authority was working on for a couple decades a habitat conservation plan to build on that base-wide HMP that would allow the various local jurisdictions to comply with the state and federal Endangered Species Act. That didn't quite pan out for a number of reasons, and I'm happy to take any questions about that process. But what resulted is that was that all the local land use jurisdictions that receive land now had to be in compliance with the Habitat Management Plan, the HMP. The old 1997 version, still approved, still enforceable. The agencies and local land use jurisdictions need to be in compliance with that document. So the HMP and the deeds and the biological opinion all require the local land use jurisdictions that are receiving habitat management lands to prepare a site-specific resource management plan, or RMP, upon transfer. And so it's been a little while because the Fort Ord HCP was in progress, and the agencies were going to roll in those HMP requirements into the into the HCP. But again, that didn't happen. So we're back to our original square one, which is just a habitat resource management plan. This is not a take permit process for development on the former Fort Ord. This is just to get in compliance and identify the habitat management requirements for these different properties that the county and MPC own. So it's important to understand that this isn't a development proposal. This is a plan to outline habitat management requirements. And we can get into the goals of those plans. So again, the installation-wide HMP is overarching. It covers all the 28,000 plus acres you saw on the map. And the goal of that plan, again, to mitigate for the Army's impacts of the disposal and reuse of the base are to promote preservation, enhancement, and restoration of habitat and populations of specific species. I think there's 18 or 19 of them identified in the HMP, while allowing development on selected properties. Again, that white clear, no color area versus the green areas. It also provides for, at a minimum, no net loss of populations or important habitat for any of the specific species. And the obviously the biological opinion concurred with these findings and these goals and supported that process. So the RMPs that are required for the county's parcels, the goals here are to, of course, comply with the goals of the habitat management plan, the requirements of the deeds and the biological opinion, but also at a county level and MPC level to preserve, protect, and enhance populations and habitat, avoiding impacts while conserving and promoting their habitat areas, and providing a management for these reserve and borderland areas. Next slide, please. So what parcels do we speak of? We talked a little bit in the regional context, but now we're zooming in to that area on the eastern central eastern part of former Fort Ord here, where we have a very busy map for you. The HMP identifies a number, like I said, a number of categories, and also different areas with different names and different requirements for habitat management and preservation. So Melanie, maybe we'll start. Well, let me give you the overview and then we can talk through the areas. So the county basewide, again, total about 2,600 acres. Some of those being those clear areas with no color that are designated for development. So of the RMP, for the RMP, it's really focused on a subset of those as called out in the HMP. So about 2,077 acres of county lands to be included in this RMP process. And those we'll walk you through it. It's about 1,540 acres of habitat management areas. And then these yellow borderland parcels will get to about 537 acres. For the MPC, Monterey Peninsula College areas, they have a reserve. It's about 201 acres, this kind of U-shaped parcel down here on the lower left, and a few borderland parcels to the north of that reserve area. So not to get too much in the weeds, and I'm happy to get into the weeds and take very detailed questions if they arise. But I do want to save time for questions and input on the purpose of this meeting. But basically, these green areas that you see are habitat reserve parcels. They have very specific requirements in the HMP, not allowing minimal development allowed, if any. The yellow borderland parcels, the purpose of the borderland parcels are interesting. So what the HMP proposed is that any development coming in and abutting these reserve areas you see in green here should have special restrictions and requirements so that any development coming in do not adversely affect the sensitive habitat and species that are within the reserve areas. So that's the point and the difference between these borderland parcels versus reserve parcels. Now in the center there, Melanie, maybe you want to kind of put your cursor on the weird habitat corridor and youth camp parcels. These have a weird designation, weird in that they're very unique to the plan here. They're called out specifically as habitat corridor. It was this was originally seen as an area where wildlife and plants, seeds, etc., could disperse from the large area of the National Monument to the south to the north, where you saw those marina parcels as well. So it was really seen as an important corridor north and south to connect the base and keep the conservation values of the former Fort Ord. I think I covered everything here. Oh, I always forget because they're all the way at the bottom. But just to give you some context, there's a Wolf Hill and a Lookout Ridge. Those are two habitat management areas that they directly abut the Laguna Seca Raceway. So there's some overflow parking and some uses allowed there, but generally they are county owned and they do have habitat management requirements. Okay, I think I got them all. Thanks, Melanie. Like Vanna White. Okay, so for the county's RMP process, also the MPC process, here are a few of our milestones. Please note the double asterisks at the end that identify milestones that include opportunity for the public to provide input via community meeting, a document review, and or public hearing. So we started early on with public and agency outreach and early coordination, meeting with the different agencies and abutting landowners and getting this process going. And by process, I do mean by the last couple of years, this bullet where we are now, the data collection for the draft baseline inventory maps and narratives has been very extensive. As you can see, that's a lot of acreage. Protocol level plant surveys were conducted in the reserve areas, not all of the borderland areas. And we got great new aerials through drone flights, and also did habitat mapping. And so we'll go through all that data that we've collected and the narratives, associated narratives. After this, we take your public input and we incorporate that into admin drafts of the resource management plan. We develop a cost estimate and we initiate environmental review. And no, we don't know what that looks like yet. Then we will work on finalizing, incorporating internal comments and preparing a public draft RMP and the associated environmental review, depending on what that looks like. Then we will finalize the cost estimate, RMP, environmental documents, and go to the Board of Supervisors for a decision. All right, next slide. All right, what's inside the RMP? Again, we're going to have a finalized version of this baseline inventory and narratives based on input from you all and the public on the data collected thus far, and outlining our goals and objectives, identifying habitat management activities, and again, borderland parcel requirements. There's a little bit of a difference as I tried to describe and what those look like. Based on those activities, we anticipate developing some avoidance and minimization measures. Some of those management activities or borderland requirements could impact species. So we want to identify any minimization measures to avoid and reduce any impacts. We're going to identify a monitoring and reporting program, an implementation plan. So again, the timing of all these different activities, adaptive measures and management in case something doesn't quite work out as planned. And of course, as I mentioned, the cost estimate. Next slide. So as you can imagine, with the number of areas that we're covering and the amount of data that we've collected, we have about 4 different issue maps for each of the areas. So 35 plus maps that are available on the website right now. Again, the results of our special status plant surveys, natural community habitat mapping, again, done by the drone and ground truthing, invasive species identification, where we identified large areas that should be considered in the management of these areas. And then also looking at management elements. Again, this is out there, it's open to the public. A lot of people, I know you guys are out there, and again, why we appreciate your input this evening and through our comment period here. But areas where people dump and throw trash, trespass, where volunteer trails are causing issues, erosion issues, any thoughts you have on roads and trails, and of course, a very important issue near and dear to this area is wildfire planning and making sure we have FireWise planning incorporated into this mapping effort. So next slide. So I'm not going to go through all 35 maps. I pulled out Parker Flats, one of the habitat management areas, to give you an idea of what the maps look like. So we'll go through 3 maps. This is what the special status species, plant species maps look like. Again, great aerials, and we've got low density, medium density, very individualized occurrence data for each of these areas. Oh, I guess I should mention, sorry, Melanie, go back real quick. I mentioned briefly earlier that the HMP identified 18 or 19 specific special status species, plants and wildlife. We took this above and beyond. We didn't just focus on those 18 or 19 species. It's important. And the resource agencies, CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service certainly agreed that it's important to have a holistic look and not ignore, other sensitive species that exist on the former Fort Ord, and not just focus on the 18 or 19 identified in the HMP. It's important as a holistic approach in the management of these areas that you understand what is where, and if you do want to put in a fuel break impacting one special status species that isn't actually identified in the HMP, we want to avoid that. So thanks, Melanie. Sorry about that. So this is what our natural community or habitat maps look like. Of course, we have a lot of sensitive habitat out there. The green reflects maritime chaparral, which contains a lot of sensitive species. And of course, the brown oak woodland. We have coastal scrub. We have mixed habitats. And what's really interesting about the former Fort Ord is where these habitats intermix, and you get some pretty fun and beautiful sites. All right, next one. All right, this is an example of our management element maps that identify trails and roads, areas of erosion. What else do we have here? It's too small for me to see. Yeah, erosion. So areas of concern that we want to focus and identify potentially some management activities to keep an eye on these areas and make sure these issues don't spread to the detriment of the species and habitats here within these parcels. All right, next slide. So the draft baseline inventory narratives basically provide a textual description of the maps that you see here. They identify all the special status species, plants, and wildlife with the potential to occur. We did not do protocol level wildlife surveys. We will be providing maps in the draft RNP that show potential wildlife habitat and corridors, but that's not done at this early data collection level. We're getting to that next. Again, discussing the various natural communities with the dominant species that occur there, both plants and animals that utilize that specific habitat, the distribution, and again, identifying some of those management element issues and locations, so non-native species, volunteer trails, erosion, that sort of thing. All righty. So why are we here today? To really get your input as users, recreational users, and enjoyers of this land. It's beautiful. You guys are out there. You have experience out there. We want to hear from you on what you see out there of concern or of beauty. If you know of a plant population or you've seen a lot of wildlife or badgers somewhere, we want to hear from you so that we can incorporate that baseline data into this resource management plan, because ultimately this data informs what we recommend as habitat management and borderland activities. And what do those activities look like? Basically, fire-wise planning, which we discussed, erosion control, non-native species control, security and access control, make sure that trash, motor vehicles, off-path access isn't happening, how the county and MPC will maintain road and trails, signage, what level of conservation will occur in certain areas, potentially might need to do some restoration or enhancement in some of these areas to maintain the values identified in the HMP. Educational components are very important. And again, having that monitoring and reporting component and ongoing coordination with the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, the resource agencies, community stakeholders, and others to continually get input and feedback on how the management is going, and again, maybe inform some of those adaptive management measures. Next slide, please. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Melanie, and you can go through timing and next steps.
Great, thank you, Erin. And I want to apologize to folks. Your questions are coming in, but Erin and I are probably the best ones to answer them. So I wasn't able to get as many quick answers typed, but again, we'll revisit those when we get to the Q&A. So yeah, so our timelines and next steps. So as Erin indicated, we're looking to get initial feedback and input from everyone here and others who can take a look at the materials we have available now, talking about existing conditions, so we can really incorporate all of that as we develop our internal administrative drafts of the resource management plan. So those drafts will be under development this spring into summer. Those are internal drafts. We'll work with the county, with MPC, with the regulatory agencies to review those. And then we will be developing, and during that time, we'll be initiating and scoping for environmental review. And then we anticipate in the fall of this year, hopefully early fall, that's our target, a public draft resource management plan and environmental review. Based on the feedback we get and depending on how extensive that is, we anticipate that we'll be able to finish up and come forward in the winter, early 2024, with that final resource management plan and review, and that will go to our Board of Supervisors for ultimate approval and adoption. So what we're asking tonight, really up front, both tonight, we invite any comments and input, but we really want you all to tell us your thoughts. We want you to provide input on those baseline inventory and existing conditions, as well as potential management activities that can be or could be included. So we have a web address here, and the web address is available. I'm going to ask if one of my other panelists could please copy it and drop it into the chat right now so that individuals, you can directly link and copy this website. We know it's not very user friendly. So the documents are available at the county's Fort Ord RMP website at this very long address that will get dropped into the chat for everybody. If for any reason you have trouble accessing these maps via the web link, please contact Damien. His contact information is all over on the next two slides. Please contact my colleague Damien Bai. He'll either facilitate whatever it'll need to get you access to those maps, whether that's just helping to get something available via flash drive or making a hard copy available for review at our offices. So again, if you have any trouble accessing, please contact Damien. We are asking that you do provide, even if you provide input today, we are asking if you wouldn't mind also submitting any written input, thoughts, comments, or just questions that are prompted by April 9th. So that's just under 3 weeks. That's our target date. And we would love to hear from you in that time. Again, you can directly email those comments to Damien at byed, so BYED at co.monterey.ca.us. And again, I'll ask another panelist if you guys can please drop this contact information directly into the chat as well, so attendees can copy it more easily. You can if you prefer to send a mail copy, please send that to our offices at Schillings Place. Attention to Damien. And we really encourage you to get involved. So everyone heard about tonight's meeting. So we do ask, if you did not receive an email and you don't know if you're on our email notification list, we ask that you go ahead and drop your email into the chat tonight. Our team will take those. If you're not comfortable sharing that in the public chat for everybody, feel free to just share that in the chat with our hosts and panelists. And that way you can get added to that public distribution email list. You can also, we will be updating and maintaining our website. So again, the website is that nice long link. We'll be maintaining the website as well. And on there, we will repeat all of the contact information for folks. And we'll be putting new things as they're available up on our website. So that is a good place as well to check in on. And then at any time, you can feel free to reach out to our team. Damien's going to be our point of contact on this one, and he's really going to facilitate communication with our county team, with our consultant team, MPC, or others as pertinent. And so you can please feel free to shoot him an email or give him a call directly. And so I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share. That is the end of our formal presentation. And so we know it's a lot of information. And so what's important for us is just recognizing that we're going to answer as much as we can tonight. We're available after tonight. All of the documents, those maps and everything are available on our webpage where you can just link to directly. So with that, I'm gonna, I think where we'll start. So we have a number of questions that have come through via the chat or via the Q&A. So I think where we'll start, since you guys have been very thoughtful to put them there, is let us start just going down the line as we received them coming in. I'll flag for you all, a couple have been answered already, so I'll start with those. So the first question that came in was you're coordinating with Monterey Peninsula Community College. Are you coordinating with any other jurisdictions that have habitat responsibilities, and if so, how? So yes, the county is we are working directly with Monterey Peninsula College to include their habitat parcels in our planning effort. We are also coordinating and making sure that we're in communication with other jurisdictions, a number of whom jurisdictions and entities who also have habitat responsibilities. I see representatives who are here tonight. In addition, our consultant team is actually providing consultant services to a couple of those other entities and jurisdictions as well, which really helps aid in the coordination for all of these various RMPs that are being developed. Second question that we got is, you said it was not a take permit. Will it require take permits for the management activities? So yes, to be clear, we're not processing any take or consideration for development. However, we do recognize that certain management activities that would be a part of our resource management plan and a part of our necessary activities to maintain the habitat parcels and protect them may require take permits. And so it is our intention, if those are needed, that we would seek take permits limited to those management activities where necessary in the management plan. Next question that we got, what development assumptions will be made in the development of the RMP for borderland parcels? What is the source of these assumptions? And did the board direct us to keep the option open to redesignate the borderlands as open space rather than as development land? And if that were done, how would it affect the management responsibilities or costs of the RMPs? And how would it affect the success of the RMP at meeting its goals? So first of all, we don't make assumptions about what will be developed on those borderland parcels. And so this action does not get into any of that. Are you leaving? I'm sorry, I apologize. My husband's leaving town and he just popped his head in. So, we're not making any assumptions. So what we include as borderland interim habitat management activities to protect from development and or provide for those activities until such time that they're developed are independent of what ultimately those properties may or may not be developed as. So I think that's important. did the Board of Supervisor direct to keep them in open space and redesignate? So to this point, up to this point in time, there's been no direction. When this topic has come up, there's been no direction from the board to redesignate any of those developable parcels to remove that development potential. But the question is, if that were done, how would it affect the management and cost of the RMP, and how would it affect the success of the RMP? So what we are considering, because we've recognized that it's possible, not all of these lands are ultimately may not be developed as with housing, with that physical development that may have been envisioned when the base reuse plan was originally developed. That being said, because there has been no formal policy direction, no formal action to redesignate those parcels, what we're working with in the RMP is to, and we've just initiated the conversations with the regulatory agencies to see if at such point in time when any of those development borderland parcels, if they were to be designated and protected either as open space or conservation, if at that point in time, could that then trigger and alleviate our need to not have to continue those interim habitat management parcels or some version of that, what that might look like. So we are trying to take it into consideration. We're open to ideas and we don't know exactly what that will look like, but we are considering that to allow that flexibility so that in the future, should those designations change, we don't have to amend the plan. The plan would just automatically consider. So the next question we have is, can you speak about the travel camp area? Yeah, so that travel camp might be helpful if I go back to the map just to reorient everybody. Bear with me 1 minute. Okay, I'm just going to share this. Just if I'm going to speak about a parcel, I want everyone to know which parcel I'm talking about. Okay, so the question was the travel camp parcel. So again, so this right here where I'm highlighting, this is the East Garrison development. And so just adjacent to the east and south of the East Garrison parcel is what's referred to as travel camp. And so this is the parcel that question's pertaining to that I'll be speaking to. So with regards to the travel camp, so the properties on the former Fort Ord owned by the county now are managed directly by the county's Public Works, Facilities and Parks Department. And so what I can say about that travel camp parcel to date is that it is designated to have a certain amount of allowable development in support of open space and recreation uses. That is allowed there per these underlying documents. The County Parks Department is really the point of contact and could speak more specifically to any future plans. I know that approximately a year, maybe longer, time flies. The Parks Department did hold some community meetings and workshop brainstorming sessions to collect ideas from the community about what they might like to see for uses on the former Fort Ord, and in particular on that travel camp. There was also, there had been in the past identified the possibility of making it a youth camp area, an area where there could be overnight camping. So there are a lot of ideas that have been put out there. No plans have been finalized, and it's our County Parks Department that would really facilitate any of those conversations and next steps. The question about who bears the costs that we're talking about to implement the resource management plan. So it is ultimately the responsibility for the underlying property owner who has those habitat resource management plan responsibilities. It's ultimately that property owner's responsibility to fund those activities appropriately. So when we're talking about the county's Fort Ord lands, to date, what we have identified as we do have habitat management funds upwards of 13+ million that the county received from the Fort Ord Reuse Authority at the time that FORA, that's the acronym for Fort Ord Reuse Authority, when FORA dissolved in 2020, those funds transferred to the County of Monterey allocated for habitat management uses and activities. So it's envisioned, and some of the cost consideration for the county properties will include a discussion about utilizing those habitat management costs and ideally the interest that we earn off of that money to do that annual and ongoing maintenance. There will be opportunities in the future as well, potentially for grants and other opportunities that could augment those funds. But that's to be determined exactly how that this RMP would be fully funded. And then regarding Monterey Peninsula College's portion of this, we're in active conversations with MPC about what the costs will be. We'll include them in those discussions, and what sort of Monterey Peninsula College's fair share or contribution could be towards that implementation. So I don't want to speak too much in detail with regards to MPC, but know that those are active conversations that are engaged with MPC and the county for their portion of the HMP on their properties. All right, rolling through. Next question. What alternatives to the RMP will be evaluated in the RMP EIR? What objectives will guide the selection of alternatives? And how will these objectives be developed if they have not yet been developed? So what I can say, we have not yet taken steps to identify the appropriate level of environmental analysis that we'll be doing on the RMP. And so I'm not in a position to be able to respond to that question. But we will be, that will be a subsequent step. And should it be determined that there is an EIR that we'll be developing for this project, then there will be appropriate, all of the environmental work will have appropriate public review and input, noticing to be able to address that at that time. So what is a good way to get in touch, and can this be posted on social media? Yeah, so the best way to get in touch is to contact through Damien and the email or the phone number that we provided. We will be sharing and pushing this information out through social media. We usually push this out through the Monterey County Housing and Community Development. We have our own Facebook page, and the county itself has a Facebook page. The county also has a Twitter account. And so we typically push out through those. We are very open. I know, for example, at least in East Garrison, which is adjacent to these lands, there's an active Nextdoor social media group. And so we would also look to help make sure this gets pushed out through Nextdoor as well. And we invite you all to provide us with additional forums on social media that would be useful for us to make sure that we're cross-posting on. Okay, how are you using or reusing any of the materials developed for the Habitat Conservation Plan Environmental Impact Report that was prepared under FORA? And then if so, what portions, and are we working with any of the FORA consultants? So I'm going to hand this one briefly over to Erin, because Erin and Denise Duffy Associates actually were involved in that EIR process to some extent, and she'll be able to speak to this question.
Thanks, Melanie, and great question. All that time and effort, you definitely want to be able to reuse what you can in terms of the level of effort that was put out there. So yes, DD&A was contracted by FORA, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, to complete the environmental compliance under the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Policy Act, so CEQA and NEPA, both the state and federal level. And also as part of that contract to perform the take assessment for the species included in the HCP. So interesting part of the HCP, data for species occurrence was established back in '92 and built upon. Same with the habitat mapping. And what DD&A did for this process was to actually update all the plant surveys at a protocol level. We used the habitat, so that wasn't reused. It did help identify areas that we wanted to survey or focus our surveys. Habitat mapping was used again and ground truthed and updated. Other than that, the data collected so far, I think that's pretty much the extent of it. Okay.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, next comment question. Why go to the public for specific and critical expertise like wildfire planning? An official fire agency should be consultant. POM Fire is the federal fire department on Fort Ord. So yes, we hear you. We will absolutely be coordinating with technical and subject matter experts on and stakeholders on certain elements within, including fire agencies and others. Thank you for that comment.
Melanie, can I just add, it's a really important comment. Yeah, it's kind of funny to ask for input on results of our habitat mapping or special set of species, but specific for the management issues, for those that go out there and enjoy the property or, you know, patrol the property, any input on areas of concern, again, vehicular access were not allowed, or erosion or dumping sites. This is great information for us. As you know, we can't cover every square inch. So if there's anything that is helpful from the public from a management issue, that's really, again, the focus maybe where the public could really be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and we did get a note. I did get a note that for some reason chat is disabled. And so I do see that a number of folks have dropped your emails to get added to the email list in the Q&A. We apologize for that disconnect. I will pause for a moment and ask Damien or Shandy, is there a way to enable the chat for that? Otherwise, people can just continue utilizing the Q&A for their.
Melanie, this is Shandy. I will see if there's a way, and if there is, I'll pop that in the chat and say it's
okay.
But for now, we can monitor the Q&A.
Okay.
For people's emails.
Perfect. So we will try to enable, we didn't realize it was disabled. Try to see if we can enable chat so you can just drop your emails to our hosts and panelists. But if not, you can also just put them in the Q&A and we'll check in before we end today. Okay, so we have another comment that says there is clearly a well-established recreational trail system that exists throughout the area on both habitat management parcels as well as borderland parcels. Is the intent to incorporate much of the system into the future plans for this area and take the system into account for any future development plans? The unofficial trailheads for this trail system are very busy, and these trails are heavily used by both the local and regional community, as well as by many visitors from out of the area. All right, so I'm going to break that into a couple of bite-sized pieces. So yes, these lands, the habitat lands, are intended to remain open for open space and recreation uses. Those will absolutely are intended to be maintained and taken into consideration. In terms of the parcels that are identified as could be developed, and therefore those borderland parcels, currently they're open to the public and recreation, or they're not restricted for that access. And there are two ways in which existing recreation could be taken into consideration in the future. So the first, what I did want to acknowledge is that the county did undertake a planning effort for the Fort Ord Habitat Conservation Area, Recreation and Conservation Area, and Management Plan. That effort was actually put on hold a number of years ago, largely because at the time it was pending, there was a good deal of work happening with the FORAS, the Fort Ord Habitat Conservation Plan, and environmental analysis was going to be needed. And so at the time it was put on hold and shifted priorities of staff time to focus on that habitat conservation plan efforts. At this time, there's not an identified timeline to pick that draft recreational and management plan for the open space recreation activities. But it exists, and I would envision that that plan itself would be picked up at some point in time and then finalized, incorporating the requirements of this habitat resource management plan. Should in the future, there are currently no development plans or proposals that the county is aware of on properties. Should in the future there be any development proposals, at that time, through that proposal process and the public process, there would be the time also in which the community could engage and discuss and provide input about ideas for taking that existing access and trail system into account. So that's those avenues for future planning. The unofficial trailheads being overwhelmed, heavy use of the systems. Yes, it is recognized, and it was identified that there is need to provide additional formal trailhead and access points. At this time, there's been some discussion. So on this north end where we're talking about where the county lands are and others, there has been some discussion. I believe the city of Seaside, and I don't want to speak too far, but I know some entities have been looking at access on the west side to try to formalize some parking and access there on the west side near Gidling Roads, I believe. And again, I'm not going to speak to it. It's not our project. There has been some discussion of possibly utilizing some of the county's properties, including potentially the travel camp, also to accommodate potential parking and access areas. There are no plans current and active on that, but that has been discussed, and it is recognized that there is a need to provide more of those formal access sites. But that's not the scope of this today, and so I don't want to speak beyond that. Okay, next question. Can you please tell us more details on weed management in habitat reserve and borderland parcels? Does the RMP provide for ongoing weed treatment? So I'm going to go ahead and hand that over to Erin to discuss briefly how invasive and weeds are addressed or may be addressed.
They will be addressed. So thanks, Bart. Nice to see you here tonight. Yes, we will be incorporating those requirements into the borderlands and reserve areas, and would love to reach out to both BLM and BRAC about their efforts. We know that they have a great weed abatement program. So thanks for that question.
Great, thank you. Okay, the next question, how will the RMP be funded? So, so I think I already answered that. The current efforts to develop the RMP is being funded, for the county's portion is being funded directly out of those habitat management funds that we received from FORA. We have those designated in a separate fund tracking. And for Monterey Peninsula College lands, we're coordinating with MPC. We're developing a draft memorandum of agreement, which would identify MPC providing some costs to the county for their portion of developing the plan. And then I already spoke to when we get to implementation, how that might be funded going forward. There are some unknowns there. Okay, and I do see a oh, sorry. You know, Steve, I see you put a couple of questions in the questions. Steve, I'm going to actually go ahead and elevate you. So it'll give you an option. I'm going to elevate you as a panelist. You don't have to accept only in the event, because I think it's nice for folks to see that who you are joined with MPC. You don't have to speak, but if you do want to provide any input, you're welcome to. You can ignore me, but also we will be providing a summary. Thank you, Steve. That's great. We will be taking in these inputs and helping to provide a summary. And Steve, we will be sharing some of that directly with you as it relates to your properties in particular. Okay, so continuing on with our questions. Sorry, it just popped around. Hopefully I didn't miss any. Okay, are there any plans for discouraging illegal trash dumping along Inner Garrison Road? So what I can say, The RMP will incorporate considerations for how we might take into account trash, illegal dumping, and other items. And in the meantime, again, the Monterey County Public Works Facilities and Parks Department is the department that physically manages the lands right now. And I don't have an answer for currently how that may be discouraged. We also invite your input on if you all have creative ideas and ways, or want to make sure that we identify some of these recurring dumping areas to make sure that our plan does include opportunity for discouraging that illegal trash dumpings. Okay, that as I scroll gets me to the end of all of the typed questions in the Q&A. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a moment and double check in the chat that there aren't any questions. Okay, there are no questions in the chat. So what I want to do right now is take an opportunity for anyone who hasn't had a question or hasn't had their question answered to please go ahead and raise your hand. So again, you can use the raise hand function. If you'd like to speak, if you'd like to clarify anything for questions that were posed, or you have any new questions or otherwise. And right now I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm going to do a time check then. We are at 6:30. I don't see any hands raised. Miraculously, we did get through all of the posed questions just in the nick of time. So I think with that, what I'll do is really want to thank everyone who participated tonight. We know this is a lot of information and it's a really important area. So we thank you all for your questions and comments here. We thank you all for taking a look at our website and providing written questions, comments, input to us. And again, reach out to our team. Reach out to our team as you have questions. And otherwise, we wish you all a good evening and we'll be in touch. And please don't forget, if you haven't done so yet, before you exit the meeting and would like to be added, please make sure we have your email address so that we can add you to that email public distribution list as well. Thank you.
And I want to echo your thank you, Molly. This was a great turnout. I was wondering if anybody would show up. So I know Former Fort Ord is very important to a lot of people. So thank you so much. And again, looking forward to your input on this and continued input. So thank you.
Yeah. So as you all hop off, make sure you leave your emails. We're going to stop the recording now. We're going to go ahead and stay on just while everyone pops up in case there's just